The Bronze Age collapse. Picture the year 1200 BC. You're living in the most connected, most advanced world civilization has ever produced. Palaces, writing systems, international trade routes stretching thousands of miles. Basically, the Bronze Age internet. Then, within about 50 years, almost all of it just stops. The Mycenaeans in Greece, the mighty Hittite Empire, cities across the entire eastern Mediterranean, all collapsing within decades of each other like dominoes nobody set up on purpose. Here's what's actually happening. Bronze needs tin, and tin has to travel from ridiculously far away. The whole economy only works if that supply chain never breaks. It breaks. Add in a brutal, prolonged drought, crop failures, and waves of mysterious raiders historians just call the Sea Peoples because nobody's entirely sure who they were. And you've got a system with zero slack left to absorb the hit. The result? Mainland Greece's population dropped by an estimated 90%. Writing itself disappeared for centuries. Historians literally call what came next the Greek Dark Age because it was, in fact, dark. One broken supply chain and the ancient world went quiet for 400 years. The Western Roman Empire. Here's the thing everyone gets wrong about Rome. It didn't fall on a Tuesday. There was no single dramatic collapse where the lights just went out. Rome bled out over roughly 200 years, so slowly that most people living through it probably had no idea they were watching one of history's biggest empires die in real time. The mechanism is basically a Ponzi scheme with legions. Rome's whole economy ran on conquest, new land, new slaves, new loot to pay the army. Stop expanding, and that engine has nothing left to burn. So Rome started cutting its coins with cheaper metal, tanking trust in its own currency, while somehow also defending a border thousands of miles long from groups the Romans dismissively called barbarians, many of whom were themselves getting pushed west by an even scarier group, the Huns. Split the empire in two to make it more manageable, and congratulations, you've just built two smaller targets instead of one strong one. By 410 AD, the city of Rome got sacked for the first time in 800 years. The western half never came back from it. The eastern half kept going for another 1,000 years under a new name, the Byzantine Empire. Empire, same starting point, wildly different ending. The Maya civilization. Quick myth check before we start. The Maya did not vanish. Millions of Maya people are alive right now. What actually collapsed, between 800 and 900 AD, was the classic Maya political system, dozens of powerful city-states across Central America that suddenly stopped building monuments and largely emptied out. The leading suspect is depressingly simple: drought. Tree ring and lake sediment data show a run of brutal, multi-year droughts, hitting right as Maya cities were more crowded and more agriculturally maxed out than ever before. We're talking cities holding tens of thousands of people, all depending on rainfall with basically no backup plan for a bad decade. Now stack constant warfare between rival city-states, fighting over shrinking resources on top of that, plus centuries of deforestation from non-stop construction quietly wrecking the local climate, and you get a system eating itself from the inside out. It wasn't one collapse, it was dozens of local collapses that just happened to overlap and look, from a distance, like one big one. The Indus Valley civilization. If you've never heard of this one, that's kind of the point. This civilization rivaled Egypt and Mesopotamia in scale, and somehow it's the one nobody talks about. Cities like Mohenjo-Daro had grid-planned streets and indoor plumbing 4,000 years ago. Then, starting around 1900 BC, over several centuries, everyone just left. What killed it appears to be geography quietly turning on its own people. Researchers believe the monsoon patterns feeding the region's rivers shifted, and one major river the cities depended on may have changed course entirely, essentially stranding entire settlements. No burned palaces here, no mass graves, no invaders storming the gates, just a slow climatic betrayal. A civilization that had mastered urban engineering, sewage systems and all, could not out-engineer a river deciding to go somewhere else. So people packed up in smaller groups and migrated east. Sometimes the apocalypse isn't fire. Sometimes it's just water going the wrong direction for 200 years straight. The Minoans of Crete. Around 1600 BC, a volcanic island called Thera, which you probably know today as Santorini, erupted in one of the biggest volcanic events ever recorded. It sat about 70 miles from Crete, home of Europe's first advanced Bronze Age civilization, the Minoans. Here's the twist. The eruption alone didn't finish them. Sites show the Minoans actually rebuilt afterward, but the compounding damage, tsunamis wrecking coastal ports, ash disrupting farmland, and an economy that ran almost entirely on maritime trade suddenly missing its ships and harbors, weakened them permanently. Within about a century and a half, Mycenaean Greeks from the mainland had simply moved in and taken over. The volcano didn't kill the Minoans directly, it kicked the legs out from an economy with zero redundancy, and that gave someone else on the mainland just enough time to walk in and take the empire while it was down. Easter Island, Rapa Nui. You've probably heard this one already, and you've probably heard it wrong. The popular version says islanders cut down every tree building giant stone heads, wrecked their own ecosystem, and collapsed into starvation and warfare before Europeans ever showed up. Great cautionary tale, increasingly looks incomplete. Newer research suggests the population was actually holding fairly steady when Europeans made first contact in 1722. The deforestation was real, partly caused by rats that arrived with the original settlers and devoured native palm seeds faster than the trees could regrow. But the dramatic population crash everyone associates with Rapa Nui lines up far more closely with European contact itself, introduced disease, and later, slave raiding. So the mechanism here isn't quite self-destruction. It's an ecosystem under long-term stress that got finished off by outside contact. The moral people took from this story for decades might be true in general. It just might not be true about Rapa Nui specifically. The Khmer Empire, Angkor. At its peak in the 1200s, Angkor in modern Cambodia was likely the largest city on the planet, sprawling across roughly 1,000 square kilometers, built entirely around one of the most ambitious water engineering systems in human history. That water system was Angkor's greatest achievement, and it was also the thing that ultimately killed it. Tree ring data shows the region hit by decades-long megadroughts, punctuated by sudden, violent monsoons that overwhelmed the infrastructure with flooding. A system engineered for predictable water flow simply cannot survive wild swings between extremes. Canals silted up, reservoirs failed, and repairing infrastructure at that scale needed exactly the kind of stable, wealthy state that drought damage was actively destroying. Add pressure from a rising rival kingdom next door, and Angkor's population gradually drained away, with the capital effectively abandoned by the 1400s. The city that engineered its way to greatness got out-engineered by its own climate. The Norse colony in Greenland. This one's smaller, but it's brutal in how clear-cut it is. Norse settlers landed in Greenland around 985 AD and built a functioning European-style farming colony that lasted nearly 500 years, right up until it simply disappeared sometime in the 1400s. Here's what happened. They arrived during a warm climate window and built their whole economy around cattle farming, exactly like back home in Scandinavia. Then the climate cooled sharply, a period known as the Little Ice Age. Grazing seasons shrank. Ice choked off the trade routes back to Europe they relied on for essential supplies. Meanwhile, their neighbors, the Inuit, whose hunting-based lifestyle was far better suited to Arctic conditions, thrived through the exact same climate shift. The Norse colonists apparently just refused to adapt, sticking to European farming methods instead of adopting proven Inuit techniques. Turns out stubbornness, more than the ice itself, might be what actually finished them off.